Hello and welcome all again to yet another podcast of Celoxis, where we talk about different trends in project management, uh, insights, and also speak to industry experts and thought leaders, such as one we have today. Ben, welcome to this podcast.
Hi, thanks for inviting me.
Welcome. And before we begin, why don't you introduce yourself and what you do? That will be great for our viewers.
Absolutely. So, hi, my name is Benjamin Chan. I'm a project leadership success coach. You can think of me as an executive coach for project managers, but really helping more project managers be able to transform from being stressed and overwhelmed by their challenges so that they can have a confident and strategic mindset in how they can deliver as project leaders.
Oh, interesting. Interesting, and exactly why we're talking today. The important topic today is to know the changing roles of project managers in this current business scenarios. So, since you've been coaching and talking to a lot of project managers, tell
Yes.
what have you experienced with the business and market changes? How has the role of a project manager changed so far?
Well, I think right now there's a lot of focus that needs to also be done on things outside of your project, right? So when we're talking about things that are rapidly changing and how they may impact projects, project managers are required to be a lot more adaptable and flexible to all of these things coming in that are completely outside of their control. So when they look at things around scope, around their costs and schedule, all of that could be thrown out of whack because of government policy, because of political conversations, because of market conditions, whatever it might be, that suddenly shift and then as a project manager, you need to think about, well, how do I adapt? What do I need to go and change to get to the right business result or provide the right outcomes?
I think what you're talking about is going beyond. My natural question was, is it agile or is it waterfall or hybrid? I think you're talking much beyond that as well.
Yeah, I mean, Agile you have your product owner usually that's going to provide you more information about different features they want to go and add and whatnot. But to me, I view it as just a different way of how you're managing a lot of the changes. Agile obviously allows it to go and change a lot more easily because you may be working in sprints or maybe you're working off a Kanban board for your workflow, whatever it might be. But I think just being aware of how things are changing within your organization and even having the conversation sometimes with executive sponsors of, do we think this is a problem? How are we looking at risk? And how do we adjust to it, right? I view it as somewhat, let's say, methodology agnostic.
Very true, very true. And you touched upon a very good point about executive sponsors, and that is one thing
Mhm.
which lacks a lot with the project managers because probably they're drowned into their day-to-day activities and all, and they probably miss to take a say bird's eye view on what's happening and sit with their executive sponsors. So, have you seen that happening lately a lot with changing landscape?
Um, I think just even without the changing landscape, I think there's sometimes a little bit of a gap where project managers may be involved too much into the day to day. And then at the same time, the executive sponsors are involved in their own role, right? They're maybe an executive sponsor for your project and could be on multiple different projects,
Absolutely.
right? They obviously have that strategic view of how things are working and operating inside of the organization. But that's where I think the project manager as a whole, they need to be able to help bridge that gap a little bit and have that conversation so that they're not caught off surprise of like, oh, what are all these changes? What are we doing? All of these areas, right? And so I think even with all of this volatility, a lot of the data that allows project managers and executive sponsors to communicate is something that definitely needs to be a lot more, I'll say, prevalent so that it's accessible, it's easy to access. And one, I think people have the same view of the data because even with data and statistics, you can kind of make up your own story around it. But what is the real story around it? And that's where that real conversation needs to happen.
True, and that leads me to my next topic as well. You from where do you get data? Data you get from technology and tools, and people, processes, and technology are part of the whole project management gamut. How the whole vehicle moves. So, I want to know, in terms of people, process, and technology, how do you weigh in technology's support in moving a project well ahead, and how does it really make or break in a way to manage a project?
Yeah, it's interesting because from me as a consultant perspective as well, in a lot of the projects that I've worked on, I don't have any inherent tools that I use other than I say just maybe Microsoft products, right? Like Excel, Word, whatever it is. Everything else is supplied by the client where I use what they give me. And I think where it can be good is it can allow a lot of accessibility, but when you don't understand what the data is telling you, or maybe it's inaccurate, then all of a sudden you're fighting this whole list of issues, even trying to find the truth, right? And what is reliable. And so having that one source of truth for a lot of the data, and I will say for me, having accurate cost data is one thing that is I always kind of look for. And when it's not there, oh man, you're running around trying to chase invoices, you're running around trying to go and talk with accounting and whatnot, trying to figure it out. And you're not dedicating your time to the real value add, right? And so even from a tool perspective, I just like to go and understand what does the data mean? And usually having someone inside be able to interpret it for me is great. But then doing that sanity check of like, does it make sense? Is it actually driving towards what I'm looking for? Right. That's always a bit of a key area that can sometimes drive me a little bit nuts. But I think in terms of that interaction of people, process, and tools, right? Everyone knows that that's kind of like that golden triangle you always have to kind of work with nicely, right? And making sure that there's a good connection between them, that people are doing things for the right reasons. We understand why it's telling it and how it's impacting people and what you do with that data, right? That whole cycle needs to be fairly well fleshed out. And if it's not, it's good to have that conversation anyway, because if it's a problem now, it's probably going to be a bigger problem later on in your project as well.
Very true, very true. And see, like you mentioned, there is a data which can be seen in a different way. And that's where whenever
Mhm.
we have conversation as a product company with a lot of customers, we encourage to get the executive sponsors, the finance team, the project team together so that they can view what actually everybody thinks and is happening in the project. For example, risk for a project manager can be limited to his own risk only, but an executive can look at a lot of risk in a lot of projects and could find a pattern in it as well. And that's what we enable through our tool, Celoxis, as an out-of-the-box PPM solution, wherein
Mhm.
you see data for everybody, like you mentioned, financing, cost angle, risk angle, everything you should know as a single truth for everybody. And that really, really simplifies things instead of juggling between spreadsheets, and one has one spreadsheet version, another has another PowerPoint version, and it just mess a lot of times.
Yeah, absolutely.
So good. And one of the questions that I usually ask to a lot of thought leaders is um, whether one should go with a technology stack first and then set up processes, or set up the processes and then maybe it takes a lot of time and then you go with a tool, or what's the best way that you would suggest for people who are trying to streamline their processes using the tool?
Yeah. And I myself am a proponent of making sure you understand your process and your people before you get your tools. A lot of times I've seen the organizations try and bring in a tool and say this is a silver bullet, but then they still run into the people and process problems and they don't actually solve the problem they're looking for, right? And I think this also brings into a lot of other different, I want to say paradoxes, right? Of build or buy, customize or outside of the box, right? And how do you balance the people, process, and tools area? And so I think if you follow and understand your business, you understand your processes and people first, then you can better select what your tool is that can suit what you need, right? And hopefully, if you're selecting a tool, it also helps reveal maybe other blind spots you might have within your organization between people and process. But if you're looking for the tool to be the silver bullet and say, hey, now that we got, I don't know, some new bells and whistles of a tool to help solve all of our problems, if you don't have the other things in place, it's not going to matter.
True. Yeah, you're right. I mean, uh, get your act together is what one one of the customers has said to us, to their internal team, because let's have an introspection of what we are lacking, and like you said, find the blind spot, and that really helps. Yeah, you're right.
Right. And I think that also, just as a quick add, I think it also puts the vendor IT organization in a very bad spot. If the customer doesn't know what they want and they say, "You're not delivering what I want," it's like, well, but you don't know what you want. How are we supposed to deliver on it? Right. So there's kind of a little bit of protection on both sides. It's like, if you understand what you want first as an organization, what your processes, what your people are looking like, it really helps that relationship a lot easier between, a vendor coming in and saying, "Here, I'm going to go and deliver this," because the last thing you want is all of those arguments when really you need to do a lot of that internal work first.
You're right. You're right. And pulling on that thread, I also want to know
Mhm.
your views and the new project managers that are coming in the industry, because earlier there used to be a PMP certified project manager and they're doing their job. But you talk about some marketing agencies or some, I won't say Gen Z, but quite a younger lot of people coming in, they're doing project manager. They're
Mhm.
not necessarily PMP certified and all. So, what's your piece of advice for them, or what do you recommend them to get themselves equipped with in terms of, say, skill, knowledge, or technology?
Yeah, I think this might be a hot take. Really, I view project management and project leadership like it's the art and science of getting things done.
Very well said. Yeah, it
Right?
is.
So the science portion of it, you could be viewing it as your PMP, whatever it is, from your foundational technical understanding of things. And the way that I view certifications like that is that it allows people to have a common language to go and talk to each other. Right? That if I talk about something that's a risk or an issue, or there's lag in a schedule, that everyone kind of understands what that means. Or if they don't, then at least you can be able to go and define it and get everyone on the same page, right? Because the last thing you want to be arguing about is definitions. That's just not a useful conversation, right? So, and at the same time, it provides a lot of groundwork of how we think things should be done. But we all know it never hands like works out in a utopian state, right? That everything works the way that you thought it would, in the ways that we think it could. And so that's where I think, where you have leadership skills integrated with that, right? And whether you get it from other certifications, and experience has a huge weight in that as well, right? Of how are you dealing with all of these problems? What have you learned to be able to go and deal with that? And how are you able to go and adapt to all of these changes to get it done? And so even if it's adapting to a new tool, adapting to new stakeholders, adapting to other stakeholder behaviors or team behaviors, whatever it might be, right? There's so much in there. And so I think for me, like, I just feel like I'm just constantly a student as well as a practitioner, right? And so if we look at, what should the new PMs be looking at, I'd say take a look at, where your industry is going. If you're centering on a niche industry, what are the standards that they have in place, and what can you learn to be able to do it, and what can you do to be able to practice a lot of those skills?
Mhm.
PMP certifications and other, Google project management certification, whatever it might be, all of those are knowledge based, but you really want to be able to go and practice it and understand how does that work within your organization, your context.
Yeah, that's a good advice, and something that one should definitely consider, because, yeah, be industry specific, be very contextualized with your company, your organization that you're working for, and that will really help. And
Mhm.
uh, one of the cliched question again, about the AI, with the
Yeah.
introduction of AI, what should the PMs be worried about AI, or how can they best leverage AI? What's your take on it?
Yeah, honestly, I don't think there's anything to be worried about from a project manager perspective about AI. It's more, if anything, the biggest concern is how do you use it effectively and also fact check it properly, right? The the assistance that it can provide can be very advantageous in providing you a larger data set to be able to access. So, for example, if you're working on a large project, but and there's not a lot of data within the organization to help identify risks, and you want to be able to look at that class of project and say, what are the risks, common risks for this type of project? You might not be able to have that in the organization. Maybe it's just talking with the people on your team, but they may not have that information. And that's where AI allows you access to a larger data set to be able to say, hey, can you present me the top, I don't know, 10 risks for this type of project that I need to be aware of or address? And that acts as a starting point that maybe your team can have discussion on, right? Which is really great. And even from an internal perspective, is that when you have all the data of your project data, you can ask things about maybe the critical path, right? Has the critical path changed? Are there things that you need to be able to go and adjust or have things automated from, assigning it from one person to the next, depending on how resourcing and all those elements work. And so think it can be very advantageous in how you use it and speed up a lot of things. Like obviously meeting minutes and transcription, love that. I don't want to be able to go and spend my time doing those type of things, right?
Right.
But the caution I would also have is there's a possibility it could be wrong. And so if you always take it as gospel, then you could accidentally introduce more errors into your project, more issues into your project. And so my head always kind of goes towards, well, how much time do I spend on fact checking it? And if I have to fact check it, should I just do it myself? Right. But I think that's where, we have to develop a little bit more of that intuition of understanding, does that feel right? Right.
Mm.
And then understanding, does that data actually correlate to what is provided by AI, or is it, or how trustworthy or reliable is that information? Right. Because I've come across things where it's a little bit of a hallucination and I'm like, that's not so right. But not everyone has that experience in being able to look at the AI content and say, yes, this is a little bit off, or this is correct, and I can go ahead with it, right? So being able to see how we fact check is going to be a big thing, and overall, I think it's just how are you able to use some of these tools and how to use them effectively. There's so many on the market right now that you're going to be paying. It's almost like subscribing to TV channels at this point or streaming services. There's just so many to go and choose from. It's like, oh, but I want that, and everything's so niche. So being able to understand what's out there is going to be really key.
You're right. And I'll just take 2 points out of your answer. One is, I
Yeah.
think using AI, a project team can really open new dimensions of discussions and looking at the data in a different way. And second is just consider, is it really saving your time or not? And then go for it and evaluate. And on
Right.
that note, we Celoxis also have introduced AI, and believe me, it's a time saver, like everybody says. But imagine there are, say, 1,000 tasks in a project, and you can just resource it and staff it within 5 minutes. That's like a huge time saver where you actually just need to few clicks, and the AI does the entire staffing, avoids
Right.
conflict, everything. So that is something we really we take pride in, and we are showing it to our customers, and they're loving it a lot. And because they say, show me magic, only then I'll believe it's an AI. Otherwise, just don't give me a regular AI thing. And we end up showing
Yeah.
magic to them.
Yeah. You have to prove it.
Exactly. And fine, it was a good conversation, Ben. One last parting comment I from you is, when you said that you talk with a lot of you sort of make project managers project leaders. Can you give us a
Mhm.
success story of it, how it has helped one of your prodigy, and maybe some can really take benefit from it as well?
Yeah, I think inside the industry, there's a lot of, I'd say, accidental project managers, right? And sometimes their first inclination is, I want to go and get my PMP or certification of some sort to be able to go and establish that I'm a project manager. And I'd say, great, good, go ahead and do that. But again, it only provides you some of the technical knowledge. And so, what I do as a project leadership coach is really helping them understand the broader set of skills they may need to go and learn, as well as from a mindset perspective, what they should be looking at, how they can go and drive themselves as well as their team forward. Right. So, this is where it's the art and science piece is this. I work more with the art side of it, right? And so even a client I've worked with, they were out in Singapore doing a I think it was an e-learning project, and she was in the accidental stage, right? So she was a QA analyst before, and their project manager left the company, and they said, "We need a project manager." So they
Yeah.
threw her in there, and she was completely confused as to how to be able to go and do it. I didn't say, "Hey, go and learn the PM BOK and then go back and execute your project. That's going to take too long." So we worked on a bi-weekly schedule to go and set towards an action plan for her to make the biggest impact on her project and understand the results from it so
Yeah.
that she could interface with, you know, the stakeholders, the sponsors. How do you conduct a lot of those conversations so that they're productive, as well as some of the technical pieces of how do we create a good schedule? How do we go and move maybe some things into a little bit more of an agile state and turn it maybe more into hybrid so that you can actually have better results? And she not only finished her project, but also earned another 2 client projects after the results of her work. So that's where I love to go and see people making an impact in their lives and be confident in where they are.
Absolutely. And that's like a more than a reward for you when you see your project succeeding. So
Absolutely.
nice. Good, Ben. It was nice talking to you and got some refreshing ideas and refreshing views from you. It was really a pleasure to host you and listen to you.
Yeah, thank you for having me on. It's awesome coming on here.
Thanks a lot.
All right, thanks.